everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is part 2 of the pillbox hat making tutorials. Today I'm going to be showing you how to finish off your pillbox hat and decorate it. So this is the second part to the 2-part tutorial. So if you haven't watched the first one and you don't know how to make these, check out my YouTube channel. You'll be able to find it and you'll be able to make along. And today I'm going to show you how to sew the top to the bottom, line the inside like this. I'm also today going to be showing you how to add veiling to your pillbox hat like this. So you can use anything for this. I suggest a tulle or potentially a lace. So I've got another one here that's got some lace on the back, and as you can see here, this one sits like this, so the veil sits at the back of this one, but you can pretty much do whatever you want. This is just a little extra. If you want to do it, you need to do it at this stage because it'll be more difficult to do once you've sewn the top of your hat down. Now, for those who have made this pillbox hat already, you don't necessarily need to watch this video. It is just to show you how to line the inside and sew the top down to make it look a little bit neater, and some ideas on how you can decorate these. But if you're already happy with your pillbox hat, you've already got ideas, you don't need to watch this. It's just a little extra for those who are interested in how to make it look a bit more polished. So I left you on the last video, I just glued the top of my pillbox hat down, so you can't actually remove this, even though you can see here there's a few gaps. It is glued down in the centre. If you wanted to make this look more polished without having to sew it, you could glue it down all the way and it would sit relatively flat. But I'm going to show you how to be getting rid of some of these little bits that are sticking out, and I'm also going to be showing you how to attach the veil at this stage. Okay, so attaching a veil is quite simple. All you need is some tulle or something similar. I've got one here that I took off an old skirt, so you can pretty much use whatever. I'm going to be using this today, but you can use anything. As well with the veils, they can be any kind of length that you want. The stiffer the material, the more it's going to sit outward. So it's going to sit off your pillbox hat outward. But I'm going to show you how to attach it as I've attached the others. So all I'm going to do to start is just stretch out this material a little bit so I can see how much I've got. Now, you don't need a massive amount for this, so offcuts are great. Maybe you have an old skirt that you want to cut up, or you have some tulle lying around. Anything will do the job. Like I say, I've used lace before. Anything that you find that is a bit too soft, that if you want it to sit out more, you can purchase spray starch, which will make any fabric that you spray it onto stiffer to make it sit more upright. So you can do that. I'm not going to bother today. I mean, this tulle's quite thin, it's quite soft. I only want a small amount, so that's fine for me. And what I'm going to do is just cut a piece off this, like so. And as you can see here, this is all I've got. It's just a little piece. And what I'm going to do now is sort of measure where I want it to go. So I know that this seam here is the back of my pillbox hat. And today I'm going to be putting the veil at the front, so I'm going to start here. Now, it is important that if you want to do this, to not glue your hat all the way down at the front. You can sew it to the front and cover it in other things if you've already done that. It's not the end of the world, but it is a little bit easier if you do it this way. So the thing with a veil is the fabric that you use needs to be non-fray. So I pull this and it can't really fray unless you want to hem the sides of it, which might be visible. So it's best to use a tulle or a lace that isn't going to fray when you're doing this. So I'm just going to clean up the edges of mine because the edges are going to remain raw. So you can see there now that the edges are quite straight. There's nothing really going on that I don't want to be going on. And this has got a little bit of giving, so I can stretch it out if I want to. Now, if I was just to attach this to my pillbox hat like so, it would be quite flat. It would just sit like that, which if you want that effect is fine. But what I'm going to show you today is how to ruche it, just to make it a little bit more textured when it's sitting on there. So for this, I'm actually going to fold this over twice so you can see it a bit easier. And I don't need to cut it, as I say, because I've just doubled it up a little bit. You can still see through it, as you see. And you can see there that it's going to sit at this sort of height off my hat. So not too far. It's quite floppy, so you need to be aware of that. But this ruching technique will just help you to keep that a little bit more textured and make it sit out at a better angle. So what I'm going to do is get a thread that's quite visible, so you're going to be able to see it easily. And so I'm just going to use this silver because I'm going to be able to see it through this fabric. And I'm just going to get a length and cut it off and get my needle. Now this is quite a fast process. You don't need to go crazy over how neat this is because this part is going to be hidden by the top of your hat. So all I'm going to do is start from the outer edge and pull it. So what I'm doing here is that I've left quite a long tail on this. So you can see here that there's a long tail that I've just left, and I'm going to try and leave that. So you need to be gentle when you're doing this, because if you pull too hard, this tail will move. So if I pull too hard, the tail has now got shorter. But you just need a little length at both ends to be able to do this, so just be aware of that. And all I'm going to do is a few really big stitches across like that, and then I'm just going to keep going along like that. So they're about, I would say, about 1 inch to 2 inches in length, these stitches. They don't need to be short stitches, they can be nice and wide, because as I say, you're not going to be able to see this once I've attached it to your hat. You just need to be careful that when you're pulling these stitches straight, that you're not pulling that little tail off the end there. So you can do something like put something on top of that tail to hold it in place. I apologise for the visibility, it's not the best, I realise that. I had a few technical difficulties the other day, and I'm just trying to work out the best way for you to be able to see this more visibly. So what I'm doing is I'm just stitching all the way across with my one length of thread, and I'm going to get to roughly the edge of my piece. Now it doesn't matter whether these stitches are the same length, it really doesn't matter for this, so don't panic if they're different lengths, it's absolutely fine. So as you can see here, I've got these big long stitches across the outside, and you can see through the fabric. So this is one stitch here, it's about this width, and I've just done that all the way across, and what I have is 2 dangly ends of my thread. So I've got 2 long ends. So I'm going to hold both those ends in one hand, and I'm just going to push the fabric towards the middle like so. So you can see that it started to move. Now what I like to do at this stage is just loosely tie that off. Don't tie it too tight, because then you can move your fabric around a little bit. So I've just loosely put a little knot in the top of that. And then I'm going to now trim those edges off so they're out of my way. And you're going to end up with something like this. So this is the top of this here, and you can see that it's all ruched together, and it's going to give it a bit more shape. So you can see that it's given it a little bit more shape now, and that's just going to make it look a bit more veily. It's going to give it a bit more texture, and like I say, you can still move this around a little bit. Now you're at the stage where you can attach it to your hat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my hat, and I'm going to get this little gap that I left at the front, and I'm just going to push that fabric into it so you can't see the stitching. Now you can make this as long as you want. You could make a veil to go all the way around the hat if you wanted to. And as you can see there, that your veil is now in place. If it won't stay put, you can pin it, but obviously mine's staying put quite well. If you want it shorter, you can keep pushing it into that area, but you can see that it's ruched, it's quite nice, it's sitting away from my hat quite nicely. Even though this fabric's quite thin, it's giving it a little bit of shape, and it's just a simple way of making these look a bit more event wear, a bit more haute couture, and adding a little bit of extra dimension. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sew the top of my pillbox hat to the bottom, and as I said before, I've already glued it. This is just to clean up some of these edges that don't look perfect, and it's just going to make it look a bit more neat. What you want to do for this is try and find a thread that's a similar colour to your fabric. So you can see here I've got a thread that's a similar colour. This is going to make your stitches more invisible. If you don't have a similar colour, you can cover this up with decoration. But for me, I just want my stitches to be as invisible as possible. So what I'm going to do is start at the back point and work my way around. So you can see here that this is my back, because this is where my little seam is. And I'm just going to work my way around. So I've got quite a long length of thread here. You can see that it's quite long. Anyone that's not comfortable with sewing, you can just use glue. That's absolutely fine. This is just for those who want to just perfect it a little bit, make it a little bit cleaner. If you're using this for photographic purposes, I imagine this would be absolutely fine, as you can see on camera. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start at this edge. Now the best thing to do with this is to bring your needle to the point where it's poking out. So you can see here I've got a little bit of fabric that pokes out, and I'd rather it be flat like that. Some of that will be resolved by pulling it round from the underneath, and some of it will be resolved by pulling it around from the top. So I'm going to put my needle through the bottom of the hat and the top of the hat. As you can see here, my needle is through this lower fabric and this upper fabric here, and I'm just going to pull that in. So what I'm going to do now is just tie that off by hand. As I say, I have a bit of a strange stitching method. It's whatever works for you. I just found that this holds it nice and tight while you're sewing, and you can see there that it started to pull itself in. And I'm just going to make a little knot here, like so. And you can barely see that stitch. So I like to leave the tail so I can tie it back off at the end. So you can see here that that's the tail there. I'm just going to leave that on there now for now and work my way around. And what I'm going to do is just keep on pushing that fabric under, putting my needle through that, and putting my needle through the fabric of the top of the hat, and just pulling it nice and tight. Now the stitches will want to come loose because of the way this is done, but just keep holding them tight and stitching your way around the outside of your hat. If there's any bits that are still sticking out, you can go back round, so don't worry about that. And like I say, you're not going to be able to see, and you can see there I've done a few stitches and it started to pull it tight around the edge and pull it inward. So I'm just going to carry on stitching that round. And I'm just, as I say, again, I'm just picking up the top fabric and the bottom fabric, and then I'm just pulling them together. So you can see here I'm just pulling all that together, and it's pulling the top of the hat closer to the bottom. Now don't worry at this stage if you go through the cardboard, that's fine, it doesn't matter, because it's just going to hold it all together a bit better anyway. I sometimes go through the cardboard myself. It really makes absolutely no difference whatsoever. So you can see there a few more stitches. I've started to pull it all in around here. This is the area that I've sewn compared to the areas I haven't stitched. You will find, I don't know whether you can see on camera, but you will find that if you use a thin fabric like satin, that you will get a few little marks. There will be holes where your needle went in. That's completely normal. You're not going to see that when it's on your head, so don't worry about it. And I'm just going to stitch around to the front of the veil now, and then I'll show you how to deal with the veil. Now, when you get to this stage, obviously I've made my stitches quite close together. They're maybe 1 or 2 millimeters apart. This is to make sure that every part of this fabric is sewn to the other part of the fabric. So make sure these stitches are quite close, and you're just going over. Right, so now I've got to the front of my hat towards this veil, and you can see here this is where my stitching ends, this is where the veil begins. So what I'm going to do is just carry on now, and we'll just sew straight through that veil. So I'm going to pick up that bottom fabric and pick up the top fabric again, and just keep stitching round and just basically ignoring the veil. So what I'm doing is, as you can see here, I'm just going straight through the veil to pick up that lower fabric, straight through that veil to pick up the higher upper fabric. And you can see there that I've just gone straight through this fabric here. If I pull it out, you might be able to see it a bit better. So you can see that I've just gone through that veil to the point where I want it, and I'm just carrying on stitching round, and it's made absolutely no difference there to my veil itself. Now what can sometimes happen when you're sewing through the veil is you sew through part of it that's too low down and it becomes bunched up. So what you can do to fix that is either take the stitch out that you've just done, or just sew over it a couple of times to remove any lumps or bumps. But what I like to do to try and avoid that is to hold this flat. So hold the veil flat to your hat, and we'll just go through the veil, through the lower fabric, through the upper fabric, like so. So I'm holding that nice and taut now, and I can just stitch over the top there. And as you can see, I'm through both fabrics and I'm through the veil. The veil still looks absolutely fine. It can still sit forward, but you're just stitching it into that hat. So I'm just going to carry on sewing round now. This is basically something that you have to sort of get down to a fine art over time. It's quite simple. As I say, it's not 100% necessary to sew the top of your hat to the bottom. In my opinion, it makes it look that little bit neater, but it doesn't really matter. So you can see here, this is the side that I've stitched compared to the side that I haven't stitched. You can see the difference. It's started to sit a lot flatter here. And I'm just going to carry on sewing round now to the front of that veil. So I'm about halfway through my veil now. As you can see here, some of the stitches are a little bit visible. That's not really an issue. Like I say, from a distance, you're not going to be able to see that. Or if you wanted to add some decoration here, you could do. So don't worry if you can see your stitches a little bit. They're always going to be to some degree visible. If I show you this one here, if you look up close at the back of this one, you can actually see that some of the stitches are visible, but that's not an issue because from a distance you can't even tell that that's a thing. So I wouldn't worry about it. The paler or more delicate your fabric, the more you are going to see stitch marks. But like I say, it's not really an issue. Just keep carrying on. By the time that you've decorated it, you'll wonder what all the fuss was about. There, I've got to the end of the veil now, and you can see that it's really starting to come together. I've just got this last bit here to do. The fabric here is quite loose, so I am just going to be pushing that in as I go with my needle. I'm just going to carry on round. Now you can see that I'm getting quite close to meeting the other side. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to carry on. The end is here. I'm just going to carry on a couple of stitches further along just to make sure that it's completely secure. So I've just gone along the first couple of stitches I did just to make sure that it's completely secure. And as you can see here, that looks much neater already. It's going to look even neater when you add the lining into the inside. You can see that my veil is now fully attached. That's not going to come off because it's just stitched between the other two layers of fabric. If you want at this point to go back round again to just clean up any lumps and bumps, you can do that. I'm not going to bother doing that today, but you can if you want to. And what I'm going to do is take the tail from the original start of my stitching and take the end of my thread with the needle attached. And I'm just going to now tie those together to make it fully secure before I trim it down. So I'm just going to put a few knots in there just to make sure that it's completely tight and completely sealed in. You can tie this off any way that you're used to tying it off by sewing. I like to make a physical knot because then I know it's not going to come undone. I've just tied that a few times and now I can just snip it off, not quite all the way to the knot. So you can see that there's a little knot there. So that is how to stitch the top to the bottom. At this stage, if you don't want to line your hat, you don't have to. I am going to show you how to add a ribbon to be able to attach this to your head, unless you've found an alternative that you'd rather use. That's absolutely fine. If you want to, if this is starting to come away, this seam, you can also sew that down like that. But this is going to become tighter once you sew your lining in like so. So it might not be 100% necessary. If you don't want to add the veil, you don't have to. And I'm going to now show you how to line the hat. I'm going to line mine in black today. So you don't need a massive amount of fabric for this. As you can see here, I've just got a little bit. Because I'm using black, I'm going to have to use chalk. So I have a dressmaker's chalk here. The top of your hat may be smaller than the circumference of your original hat. So what you can do is you can draw around your original receptacle or use your compass, or you can draw around the hat itself, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to get the hat onto a bit of fabric here, and I've got my dressmaker's chalk here, and I'm just going to draw roughly around it. It doesn't have to be perfect. So as you can see here, I've roughly drawn around that circle. So it doesn't have to be perfect because you are going to sew it anyway. For lining, you may decide that you want to do it with a sewing machine just to make it a little bit faster, or you can do it by hand. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to show you how to get there either way. So I'm just going to cut the piece with my circle off and deal with the other length that I've got here today, which is this. Now, to make sure that this is long enough, what you're going to do is get your hat. Obviously, I've scrunched up the veil here so it doesn't obscure what I'm trying to do. And I can just roll the hat round to check that, yes, that is indeed the right size, it covers my hat, it doesn't go too far, it's just about the right length. So what I'm also going to do is I'm just going to make a little mark with the hat at the edge, and I'm just going to make a little mark where the end of my hat is, so I've got an idea of where that is there. So you can see there I've made that little mark where the end of my hat is compared to the end of the fabric, which is here. If you wanted to, you could measure the end of your hat here, but I don't really think it's necessary, so I'm not going to do that. And what I'm going to do is get my ruler again, and I'm just going to draw this mark on to the rest of my fabric to give me a rough guideline as to where the edge of my hat is. Now you do not want to cut it to this line because you do need a little bit more to be able to fold it around the edge. So what I'm going to do is give it around 2 centimeters longer to 1 inch longer in order to be able to fold this line in round and to give myself enough seam allowance. So you can see there that I've now got 2 lines. I'm only going to be cutting to that top line, so I'm only going to be cutting to this line here, not the lower one. So I'm just going to cut that out just along the top line, and I'm just going to cut out the circle, and now you should have a piece like this, a circular piece, and a long piece like this. So you want to turn this to the side that's got the line on, because that's going to be the inside, facing the inside of your hat, so you can't see it. And what you're going to do is just fold this corner back on itself and pin it down, and then you can stitch this down. So I'm just going to sew that down real quick, and as you can see there, I've just done a little decorative pink stitch, and you can see the inside. So it's just to fold that bit over to make it look that little bit neater. That will now be the outside of your circle, like so. Okay, so you've got your 2 pieces, and now the only important thing to remember is where you folded it over, so you can see that this is the raw edge here, wants to be on the inside. So what you're going to do is put the good edge to the good edge of this, like so. So when it sits upright, you're going to have good edge outward, like this. So all you're going to do with this now is pin it round. So I'm just going to get my pins, and I'm just going to pin this long piece around the circle. So this can be a bit fiddly, but you'll get there eventually. This is just so when you sew it, you can sew it more easily. If you just want to stitch it straight on, go for it. I like to pin to make sure that I know where I'm going with it. So as you can see there, I've just started pinning it. That's what the inside's starting to look like now. Just keep pinning round. Obviously you're going to have some seam allowance there. I'm just going to pin this all the way around now, and as you can see there, that's pinned all the way around. You can see in the middle, that's what the inside of your hat's now going to look like. You can now check this at this stage, check it is the right size by flipping your hat upside down and just poking this into place. So you can see here that it's going to sit in the base of the inside of my hat. It's around the right size. Now it will be taller than your hat itself. There is a reason for that, because when you're going to sew it in, you're going to fold this area down to stitch it in, so you end up with a nice clean line like this. So you can see here where the circle sits, and you can see where the long bit sits. If I pull this out, you can see even better how well it's stitched in there, how that bit's sewn together, and I can just poke that back in. So you can use any kind of fabric really for this. Something that's not going to fray will be easier. You can actually buy lining fabric itself to line dresses with. That's perfect for this. I don't actually have any the right colour today, so I've just used a black cotton. But anything that's less delicate, because you're not going to see this, something that you've got as an offcut is fine. It doesn't need to be anything fancy because it's just the inside of your hat. It's just to clean it up a bit, make it look that bit neater. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to stitch around the edge here, leaving as little gap as possible, but not too much. And you can see here, if you look up close, this is the side with my lines on, because this is the side that's going to be against the hat, whereas the inside's completely clear and clean. You can see there where my pink stitching I've already done is, but you can see that that is the raw edge now folded around there. So what I'm going to do is start from this edge and just stitch all the way around. So you can use any thread for this because you're not going to be able to see it. I'm just going to use the same colour because it's what I've got to hand. So as you can see here, I've made my first few stitches, and I can just now take that first pin out because that bit is now sewn together, and you're just going to carry on round in the same vein and keep working your way round. And as you can see there, that's now stitched all the way round, so you can see on this side where the stitches are. You can see here that I've overlapped a little bit. That doesn't matter because this is going to be the inside. Now usually when you're making clothes or anything at this stage, you would turn this inside out. Now I suggest you do that anyway, just to check how well it's stitched down, so you can see that mine's pretty well stitched. I could go back round there if I wanted to. I'm not going to bother because this is only the inside of my hat. So what you're going to do is make sure that it remains inside out like so. So you've got all the rough edges that are going to sit inside your hat where you're not going to be able to see them. And then you're just going to flip your hat upside down, and you're just now going to sit that inside your hat like so. Now what I like to do once I've got to the stage where I know it fits is I like to start off the folding process. So what I like to do is start folding this down like this, so I've got a clean edge on which to work. So you can put pins in this to make it fold a little bit better. I'm just going to put one in this edge here where it doesn't want to stay folded, just for the moment while I put it back inside my hat. So you can see there that it's folded over, and now you've got a nice clean edge where it's going to sit against your hat, and you can pull that up by rolling it or push it down by rolling it that way, which is going to make it adjacent to your hat. Now some people like to make sure that this edge here sits with this edge on the outside here, so you put that side in first and sit that in and then push the rest of the hat in. Just choose where you're going to start sewing from and start from there really. So I'm going to start from here and start stitching this in. As you can see, it's not all in here, that's fine. I can deal with that as I go around. I'm just going to start with the area that I know is folded down to where I want it to be. And I'm going to get my thread again. Now for this, you probably want a thread that matches the outside more than the inside, because you're not going to see this as much if they're different colours. So just be aware of that when you sew in. And again, you're going to do a similar thing to how you sewed the top to the bottom, and you're just going to stitch all the way around again. So I'm going to start from this edge here, and I'm going to make sure that this is pushed down as tight as I can get it on this side. So you see what it looks like when it's not pushed down. Pull it in, and then push your lining fabric against it so it's as tight as possible where you're going to start stitching, and you're just going to pick up the outer fabric, and then you're going to pick up the inner fabric like so. You can see it's through both of those there, and you're just going to start sewing your way round. Again, you can leave a tail like I do here and just tie it down just to make sure it's that little bit more secure. You just pick up both bits of fabric again and sew over the top like an overstitch. So I'm just pushing the pink fabric in, and I'm holding the black against it to get a nice flat line, and I'm just stitching my way around, making sure that everything's folded over into the right place. So I've not folded all my fabric yet, that's fine. And I'm just going to do a couple of stitches for you now. Now as you can now see here, I've started stitching the top to the bottom, and I've got this nice clean area here. Now once you've got your lining in place so it's not going to move, and you've got it attached like so, I've just done a few stitches, you can see it's only attached in this area here. You want to make sure that you're going to be able to attach this to your head. So now that my lining's attached, what I'm going to do is just leave it out like this, and I'm going to now get some ribbon. So I've got some ribbon on this here, and these don't need to be too long, you just need a short length of ribbon like this here. And what you're going to do is fold that over to make a loop like so, and you're going to find where the back of your hat is. So I can see that mine's on this seam here, this is the back of my hat, and I'm going to measure to roughly the middle and pin one in to this area here like so. So you can see that that's now seated in there nicely. Now I'm going to put 3 pieces of ribbon either side. The more ribbon you put either side, the more you've got to put your hair grips in to hold this to your head. You can do this other ways. You could glue this to a headband, you could glue it to a big clip. I like to do this. because I just find that the more access points you've got to pin your hat in, the better. So I'm going to put 3 either side. So what I've done there is I've got 3 pieces of ribbon roughly either side of this pillbox hat now. They're just roughly pinned in, and what I've done to make sure that I'll be able to see those pins is each pin is facing upward like so. So they're poking further than the edge of the hat so I can see them like so. And this is just what you're going to attach the pillbox hat to the head with. So then now you can get your lining and put it back in, avoiding those ribbons, making sure that they're all facing upright so you can see them, and just carry on round now, carry on stitching round until you get to your first piece of ribbon. So I'm coming up on my first piece of ribbon now. As you can see here, I've got all these stitches ready here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold that ribbon in place with my finger, and I'm just going to remove that pin like so. And then what I'm going to do is put another stitch to get even closer to that ribbon just there. And now what I'm going to do is go through my pink fabric with my needle, through the ribbon itself and straight through the black bit. So you can see there that it's all the way through. You can see from pink to black, and you're just going to make that stitch. And you can see there that it's now started to secure my ribbon down. Obviously, as you do this, you need to be aware that you're folding your lining inwards. Now this can be a bit fiddly, but you will get there eventually. And what I'm going to do is just go back again through the black, straight through the ribbon and into the pink side, and just pull that tight, and do the same again through the pink, through the ribbon, into the black. And it's just a really easy way of securing those pieces of ribbon in place as you go along. And now you can see here that this ribbon is stitched on. I've just done a couple of stitches to stitch it on, and now it can't come loose, it's stuck on there. And what I'm going to do now is start over stitching until I get to the next piece of ribbon again. So as I was before, just stitching straight through over the top to make these stitches here. And you can see that the stitching here along the ribbon has changed and then gone back to an overstitch here. And you're just going to carry on round now, making sure that you're pulling that fabric tight, making sure that you're getting all your ribbons in. It's just an easy way of making sure that your ribbons are nice and secure, and making sure that your hat's nicely lined. Now if you don't want to put a lining in your hat, that's fine, you can just glue the pieces of ribbon in like I said in the last video. But for this, to make it clean, you do have to stitch through the ribbon just to make sure that they stay in place and that your lining and the outer fabric of your hat is all stitched down nicely together. So you can see again, now I've stitched my second ribbon in. You can see here that I'm now here with my stitching, and you can see that these two have now just been attached while I'm sewing the lining into the hat. I'm just going to now continue round, and I'll meet you back at the start. So as you can see here, this is now the inside of my hat. You can see here where it's a little bit bunched, you can just pull that out. The lining is quite movable, it's not going to stay in one place, but you can see there that it's just all stitched round, and I've got these little ribbons now which you can fold, that you can put a grip on, fold in and push into the hair like so. So what you'll end up with is something like that. You won't be able to see these pieces of ribbon. You can see if I place it down like this, that you can't see those pieces of ribbon anymore, you can just see the little veil. And there you have it. This is how to make a pillbox hat. So they do look ever so nice, they're great for occasions, they're great for photographic purposes, and you can see that it's all nice and neat now. You can see that all these little stitches are just around the outside, you can see that that's the inside, you can see that the top is much more flat than it was before, ready to put something on the top. So I'm going to be showing you how to do that in just a minute. I'll be back to give you some ideas on how to decorate your hats in just a few minutes. Welcome back. So as you can see now, I've got my 2 pillbox hats that I'm going to decorate, and I'm just going to give you a couple of ideas of what you can do, and one to create a flat look and one to create something a little bit more built up. So I have a few examples here. Obviously you've seen this one a few times now. You can see how built up it is. You need to remember that when you're doing your pillbox hats, depending on what angle they're going to be on your head, you need to consider what it's going to look like from every angle. So you can see here there are more flowers at the back, and you can see the front is the main statement piece. How your veil sits may affect how it's going to sit on your head. You need to consider that when you're making these. Another example here is how you can sew things onto your hat. So I've just made this big bow, and as you can see here, it's just stitched on in the corners and here. And obviously this is a piece of fabric that I've cut out the image that was already on the fabric, and I've just used that as the top of my hat. Here I've used one singular piece of decoration to make a bit of a statement. Another reason for this is if your fabric's already patterned, you might not want to do too much. You might want to leave it quite plain with a small statement in the centre. So all I've done with this is glue a little plastic lollipop on there, and then I've just glued these pearls on the top of the lollipop. Another example here is that before I put the fabric on the top of this one, I've embroidered the word friends. So there is another one somewhere, I couldn't find it today, that says best, and that is the opposite colourway round. This also shows you how you can use a different colour to the top and the bottom, and you can see there that that's another way you can make an image onto the fabric before you sew it on. So you could potentially do a cross stitch on a piece of fabric and then make it the top of your hat. You could if you've got an embroidery machine, you could do an embroidery design on there. Really, the sky's the limit with this. It's whatever you feel comfortable with. As you can see from this one, I haven't actually stitched it down, but you can see that it's a little bit more solid around the edges, so I didn't particularly need to. Be aware that if you are going to do this, you might want to consider being neat and not sewing it down if you do two separate colours, because as you can see, the two colours, it would be difficult. I'd have to choose whether I was going to use red or white to sew with. So there's loads of different things you can do with this, but I'm just going to show you today how to do something that's flat to the hat itself. So I'm going to use this example here. As you can see, there was something already originally glued on here, but I took it off so I could do something different with this one. Again, this one I haven't stitched the top down. I've just glued it because the top of the hat was the right size for the bottom. I explained that in the first video. So there's loads of different things you can do. Here I've just got one example, so you could do something like this with just some simple Scrabble letters. You could glue them on there to make it quite flat. You could rhinestone in every polka dot. Really just have some fun with it and see what you can come up with. If you had something like a plastic figurine, you could glue that onto the top of your hat like so. The lighter weight the better, but these hats are built to take a lot of pressure. They're built to take a lot of weight. As you will have seen if you watched the first video, they're built to take enough pressure that you could glue something like this on. If you had, like, I don't know, a dinosaur themed party for your kids, you could glue a plastic dinosaur onto here. The sky really is the limit. You can also sew things onto your hat, so you could get some beads and stitch them on. Because obviously all you need to do is stitch through the fabric, so really it's up to you. Now what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to make quite a built up decoration. So what I'm going to do is figure out where my front is, which is here, and I can see where my veil is. So when this hat's on, it's probably going to be tilted forward so that the veil comes over the eyes slightly. So you need to be aware of that when you're adding your decoration, which way round it wants to face. If the hat is going to sit at the back of your head like this one, the decoration needs to face the right way. Obviously with this one it's a heart, it needs to face the right way for the heart shape. This one, as you can see, even though the back panel is here, you can see that this one is designed to sit at the back of somebody's head so you can read the word, because if it was to sit the other way it would be upside down. So if it was to sit at the front of your head as opposed to the back, it will be the wrong way round. So you need to think about this when you're decorating your hats, whereabouts on the head it's going to be sitting. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start my biggest piece of a decoration, and I want it to sit something like this. I don't want it to sit completely flat to the hat. I want it to sit a little bit upright. So in order to do that, I've just got a little makeup sponge. Now these are great because they're a wedge shape, so they get smaller, and that's just going to tilt your design upright. So I need to now check how upright that's going to tilt my apple. If I don't want my apple to be too high up, what I can do is trim this down. Now I've chosen a pink sponge today because it's going to look less obvious than a white one. And you can see here that that started to give a bit more of the angle that I was looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and glue that on now, starting with a piece of sponge. I'm going to get the same high tack glue again from the first video. So this is the original high tack all-purpose very sticky glue. You can get this from Hobbycraft, you can get this from a lot of different places. This is really good glue. It holds things in place. It's a really good bonding agent for any kind of craft that you like to do. I use it for pretty much every kind of craft that I like to do. I've only put a little bit on, and then I'm just going to place that wedge where I want it, so roughly in the centre there. And you can see that the shorter part, as opposed to the higher part, is facing towards the front of my hat. And then I can see where my apple wants to sit. So what I'm going to do to start with is just glue directly onto the sponge, so that is where it's going to be holding my apple in place rather than trying to best guess it by gluing the apple. And then I can just place the apple on there and allow that to set. So you can see here that that started to sit at the right angle, just like that. Now what I want to do, because I've made this quite a high statement piece, is I want to add something around the back. So you're going to be able to see this entire area here, and all you can see at the moment is that little bit of sponge. So what I'm going to do is start adding other elements to build that up. So I have the main component onto my hat now, and now what I want to do is add all the little extra bits that are going to cover up this area here. So I have a few things with me today. I have floral decorations here that I'm going to use, and I've chosen to go with a similar colour theme, so I'm going for reds, pinks, potentially purples, just to give it that stark bright quality. And I have some more flowers here that I'm also going to use. What I'm going to do is start with the next biggest item down, which are these pink flowers here, and I'm just going to place them around the apple to see how they look. So you can see, I can see how they're starting to build up. So I'm going to start with one either side of the front of my apple here, just to glue on and add a bit more dimension. So I'm going to do that now. So all you're doing is checking how it looks and then gluing things on, starting with biggest to smallest. Now, as I mentioned in the first video, this glue doesn't always bond straight away. So if you're not going to wait for it to dry, you do need to be careful when you're doing this. So you can see here that I've just added a couple of flowers next to my apple here. This colour is great as well because it's a similar colour to my sponge, so it's going to make that sponge automatically less noticeable. Just be aware when you're doing this, if you're working onto a fabric such as satin, the glue is going to mark it, so you need to be relatively accurate with where you're going to put your decorations, which is a good reason to check how they're going to look before you attach them. So you can see here that I've now got a bunch of 3 at the back. And now you can just sit and check how the flowers are glued down, so how well things are glued down. And what you can do is just lift areas and add a little bit more glue if need be, just to make sure that every little element is stuck in well. Mostly it's trial and error, so you can put things down, check whether they look right, and then if they do, glue them on. If they don't, just try it elsewhere. So you can see there that I'm starting to add elements onto other elements now as well. And it's just a case of making things look right for you. So this is very girly, it's quite pink, it's quite extravagant. You don't need to copy my example here. Like for instance, all I've done here is add a neutral tone in with that turquoise, and then a pastel pink that matches. So you don't need to go crazy like I've done with this one. You could add one element of colour similar to this. So you've got all that cream ivory colour, and then you've got one singular element that has colour on it. It's pretty much whatever is right for you. And again, remember, whether you want to make it symmetrical or asymmetrical, that's really up to you. I'm just giving you a couple of ideas of what you can do. You can see here I've just added another little extra in there. With these wires you need to be careful that you're not going to displace anything else, so you can cut them down a little if you need to, just to make sure that you're not going to push that sponge out from under the apple, or they're not going to show around the other side of your work. So you can cut them down like this. So you can see here that I've now started to add the next biggest element in, which is a couple of these round glittery white spheres. And now I'm going to add my roses. So I've got these little roses and I'm going to start adding them in. And as you can see, I'm just posting them now under and around that apple to give myself more shape. If you're finding some elements particularly difficult to attach, you can use a pair of tweezers. So you can just pick up your item with a pair of tweezers, add the glue, and use the tweezers to attach them so you don't displace anything else while you're doing it. You can see here that I've just added these elements onto the front under that apple. So really it's up to you what kind of thing you want to do. Like I say, I'm just freehanding this. It's starting to remind me a little bit of Professor Umbridge from Harry Potter with all the pinks and the reds. But really it's kind of whatever you want to do, what kind of message you're wanting to send, what kind of event you're making this for, whether you're making it to go with a certain outfit or a certain makeup look. Really it depends on what kind of colour theme and what kind of decoration you're going to use. So you can see there that I'm now using the same items to create the theme all the way around the hat. You can see that I've just added a few pieces in just to make it cohesive, to create your own colour story, to create your own theme, to give you some ideas of how going on behind me. My cat has found a piece of card that she's very interested in. But she's having a great time, so I don't really want to disturb her. I'm just going to leave her to it. So as you can see here, I've made this super twee. You can see all these little details that I've added just to make it a little bit twee, a little bit grandma, a little bit Professor Umbridge. For any lovers of pink out there, you're going to love this style. So this is the back of your hat, and this is the front with all the fussy bits on. So what I'm going to do now, just to make this look even more extra, is I'm just going to add some rhinestones. Now rhinestones are great to catch attention, are great to add that little bit of sparkle. So you can add as few or as many as you want, or none at all if you don't like them. But here you can see where these are catching the light as I'm moving it. You can also see on the front that I've added some onto the orchid itself. Here's another great example of adding dimension without really doing much. That's just a false flower that I've glued the lower petals onto there so the higher petals sit upright. I just wanted to show you how to add bigger elements and make them at an angle like this with the sponges in. So you can see here now that this now is crying out for some rhinestones because it's crazy extra. Professor Umbridge is going to be calling me asking for her own custom one to be made. And she's going to walk around Hogwarts thinking she's all that. So here I've got a couple of coloured rhinestones just to add insult to injury on the colours. I've got a mid pink and I've got a small dark purple. So these are 4mm rhinestones and these are 2mm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for these 4mm rhinestones, and I'm going to get a damp Q-tip or cotton wool bud. And I'm just going to tip these into the lids. Now I buy these little containers for a few pounds off eBay, just to keep all my different rhinestones different colours, and I label what colours they are and what size they are. So as you can see there. And all I'm going to do is just add a few rhinestones onto this apple to make it blingy. So I'm going to start from the top here, and I'm just going to add dots of glue onto there. And then what I'm going to do with the damp end is just rub it on the top of that glue just to get a little bit of that glue on there so they bond to this for momentarily. And then I'm just going to press it to check that it is sticky. And then I'm going to get my rhinestones. I'm just going to pick them up with that cotton wool bud and attach them to those little dots of glue. Now this glue dries clear, so you're not going to be able to see all this white on the outside once I've done. You're just going to be able to see the rhinestones, and you can see there that those rhinestones are attached. As I say, I am going to leave this overnight to dry, so you'll get the full effect of what the rhinestones look like when they're dry. And all I'm going to do from here is add a bit of glue a little bit lower in between where the glue was before, so you can see like that. So the next set of rhinestones are going to be at a different position. You can move them a little bit while the glue is still wet. They will slide while the glue is still wet if you touch them, but the minute the glue bonds, these are not going to come off. So it's really good if you're going to be wearing this a lot. Now, as you can see there, the apple now looks like it's a little bit studded. It's got those glittery rhinestones going on. As I say, I'm going to show you this again in the morning, so you'll be able to see more clearly what that's going to look like. And what I'm going to do now is, because this is sat quite far back, I'm just going to add a couple of rhinestones into this area here just to cover up that stitching, just in case it was in case it's messy. You can just add some rhinestones to cover that up. The beauty of decoration is that by adding things, you're taking attention away from areas that you might not be 100% happy with, which is always a way of making sure that your finished product is something that you're really proud of, without having to worry about whether your stitching's not clean enough or that you're not happy with the way something sits. You can just make it up as you go along, sort of figuring out where needs attention and where is fine. But as you can see here now, I've just added those rhinestones around the edge, and I'll show you tomorrow how good they look once they've dried. Now for my smaller decorations, I'm going to use a smaller rhinestone just to add in a little bit more detail and pick out some areas. And what I'm going to do is just glue into the centre of these roses and add a little rhinestone into the centre of those, just to make it pop. So really adding smaller details on something that's already quite small can be a really good way of just drawing a little bit of attention to that area, of adding a different colour in there. I personally like the look, the more you look at something, the more you see. So I like to really build areas up and make them speak for themselves. So the more you look at this, the more you're going to see by the time it's done, because it's got so much detail to it. But really this is just to give you a general idea of what you can do to add different things. So as you can see there, this has now got plenty of decoration on. It's starting to really come together. You know, it looks a bit like a crazy quinceañera hat. I really like it because I think it's a bit of fun. It's something different to anything else I've made. But what I'm going to do now is leave this overnight to dry and show you tomorrow how it looks in daylight and how it looks when all the elements have dried. Welcome back and good morning. So you can see here that this one has now completely dried. You can see all the rhinestones now don't have that white exterior anymore where the glue was. You can see that it's all looking really nice. Those little rhinestones catch the light. And you can see that now this is completely finished and ready to be used for photographic purposes, for a crazy pink wedding, for really whatever you want to use them for. I purchased the rhinestones off eBay, so they're just cheap. They're about £1 to £2 for 1,000. They're just plastic ones. But when you're looking at this hat from a distance, you're not really going to be able to tell what kind of stones they are. They're just going to be able to catch the light. So if I put the light on here, you can see that all those stones catch the light at different angles, making that hat glitter. So there you have it, how to make your very own pillbox hat. I'd love to see where your imagination's going to take you with this. I'd love to see whether you have it built up or whether you go for something a little bit flatter. Really, the sky's the limit with this. It's a really great way of making something really special and different. They could be used for lots of different things. Although these videos have been quite long, you can make them quite quickly, and you end up with something like this as your finished product. So this one is definitely one that I think Professor Umbridge from Harry Potter would absolutely love. It's very pink, it's very twee. If you can see here, You can see those little purple rhinestones I added last night in the centre of those roses. They just elevate it a little bit, add another eye-catching element to the smaller elements on my hat. Hopefully you've enjoyed following along with me. Thank you for anyone that's managed to watch all the way through, and I appreciate people taking the time to watch these tutorials. So next we'll be moving on to thermoplastic. Thermoplastic is a beautiful medium to work with. I'll be working on doing these videos over the next couple of days, so hopefully they'll be up soon. Obviously it takes a long time to edit these videos to make sure that everything's right, to make sure all the information's there. They will be coming soon. I'll be showing you examples of how to do something flat and how to do something more advanced, like a tiara. It will be a 3-part tutorial. The first part will be how to build up a flat image to make items such as necklaces, decals to hang on your wall, pieces that you could potentially glue to a pillbox hat, and anything else that your imagination can take you can pretty much do with thermoplastic. And then in the second video I will be showing you how to create a tiara out of thermoplastic, how to create dimension and create something that's a bit more 3D, and then you can let your imagination go wild. And then in the third video I'll be showing you how I like to decorate them. So with thermoplastic I've made earrings, I've made necklaces, I've made things to go on the wall, I've made headpieces. The sky is really the limit. It's a beautiful medium, and I'll be talking more about it in the next video. So I hope you've enjoyed watching me make this ridiculously bougie hat. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Bye guys.